Hello, welcome to Spread Book Joy. Today I've got my first reading ramble of 2023. If you're new to the channel, I'm Jack, and if you're not new, welcome back to Spread Book Joy. And new or not new, grab yourself a big cup of the beverage of your choice because I've got quite a few books to talk about. So I finished another 4 or 5 books at the end of December that I need to talk to you about, and I have finished 6 books in January. So I'm not going to talk about them all in too much depth because I feel like if I want to do that, I'll have to do an individual video for them, and I kind of want to make sure this video isn't too long. So let's start with what I finished in December. So in December, I finished off the year by reading a number of short books because I thought I had a few days where I could read non-stop. I just wanted, sometimes you just want to sit and you just want to finish a book, a story to story, like cover to cover, finish the whole story. So I did that with a number of very short books. So on Boxing Day, I sat down and I thought I've got a few books which are around the 200 page mark, so I got those out, and they were these 3 books. I got out 84 Charing Cross Road, which Ange from Ange's Book Chatter sent me, and I didn't read this entire book because, as it turns out, this is 2 books. This is 84 Charing Cross Road, which I finished, and it goes up to about there, and it's the follow-on. And I don't think I need to introduce 84 Charing Cross Road. It's a series of letters sent by Helen Hanff from the 1940s to the 1960s to a shop in Charing Cross Road, a bookshop, where she had a correspondence, and she would buy books from them, and they would send them to America. And it's it's a literary gem. It's just gorgeous. It's a snapshot of that period, post-war, America and the UK. It's like a wonderful developing relationship and just really lovely. And I didn't go straight on to the next book because I was a bit emotional at the end of it. So that's all I'm going to say. So I was a bit emotional at the end of 84 Charing Cross Road. It was a lovely book, lovely read, and I wasn't quite ready to go into the next one, but I will do at some point. I also read these 2 on the same day. On Boxing Day here in the UK, I managed to finish Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and I really enjoyed this. It's a story of Keiko, who works in a convenience store. She's neurodiverse, and the order and the sort of rules and regulations of working in a convenience store means that she doesn't feel confused around social norms and what she's supposed to do and how she's supposed to act, because they even tell you how to talk to customers and the tone you have to use and everything. So she feels quite calm working there, and she ends up working there for years, and all her family and friends are like, when are you going to get a real job or get married? So she seeks out ways to kind of stop all this conversation about what she's going to do, with interesting results. So that was really good. I enjoyed Convenience Store Woman, and this was from Gem of Books. So thanks for sending this to me, Gem. She finished reading it and she sent it on to me. So thank you, Gem. And this one was How I Live Now by Meg Rossoff, which is a YA dystopian about a girl who comes to England to stay with family, and the war breaks out. So it's all around the results of that, and they get separated and they have to try and find each other. So I really enjoyed this. This is a really good YA book, and it's a good dystopian book. So if you like YA, if you like dystopian, How I Live Now is great. Apparently there's a film as well, and Alice from Alice and Giant Bookshelf sent me this because she loves her dystopian fiction, and she sent me this for my birthday, and we'd been chatting about it when we went out and visited Waterstones in Piccadilly back in the summer. So I finally read it. Thanks, Alice. I really enjoyed it. Then I finished Enchanted April, which is a buddy read with Marilyn from Marilyn Maya Mendoza, who is wonderful to read books with, particularly this kind of book, which is character driven and early 20th century literature. She really enjoys these types of books, and Marilyn reads with such depth. She gave me such a great insight into this book and made me think about things. She always makes me think about things that I would never have thought of, and I really enjoyed The Enchanted April. This was a recommendation from Gina Stania Books last year, and I saw it in Waterstones in Gower Street in London, and it was in the remainders section, and I got it, and I've been meaning to read it for ages, and I loved it. It was delightful. I've got the film to watch because I've now got the film since reading the book, and I'm going to watch that this afternoon, I think, or 84 Charing Cross Road, because I also got that adaptation as well to watch. But loved reading it with Marilyn, loved the book. It's about 4 women in London who decide to take a castle in Italy. They're all desperately unhappy in their own way, and the castle kind of works its magic on them. So it was really wonderful. I've been doing a lot of reading in January. I carried on a book that carried over from December to January for me was a buddy read of Streets of Laredo, which is the second book in the Lonesome Dove Quartet by Larry McMurtry. I read this with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot. It was a buddy read. We had read Lonesome Dove together last year and just thought we loved it so much we decided to read the series. And Lonesome Dove is a very special book. It's one of the best books that I've read and I absolutely loved it, and yeah, it's one of the best reading experiences. It's up there with my top books of all time. So Streets of Laredo would have had to go some way to be as good as Lonesome Dove, and it isn't as good as Lonesome Dove, but it isn't a bad book. In fact, it's a good book. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it the way I love Lonesome Dove. So it's a tall order for me to really fall in love with the book. But Streets of Laredo, yeah, it's doesn't go into the depth like Lonesome Dove. If you want to know, if you've read Lonesome Dove and you want to know what happens to the characters, read Streets of Laredo. It's not terrible. It's not a bad book by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not as special. It's you carry on with the same characters. Larry McMurtry, he's a great writer. I think he's a really great writer, and it's engaging, and the story is engaging enough that both Sandy and I really wanted to know what happened by the end of it. So it's not a bad book at all by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, if you're expecting something along the lines of Lonesome Dove, no, it's not. It hasn't got that sort of depth to it. You don't fall in love with the newer characters the way that there's one character in particular that we spend a lot of time with who's a newer character, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that character. So because of that, I didn't get as invested. Like in Lonesome Dove, you fall completely in love with all the characters and you are so invested in what happens to them. So it's like finding out what happens to these characters that you've already introduced in Lonesome Dove. That's a great part of Streets of Laredo. Other than that, and the story itself, the main plot, is engaging enough that you want to know what happens. You don't get that real deep sense of time and place that you get in Lonesome Dove, because the landscape in Lonesome Dove was a real big part of the book for us, and you don't really get that in the Streets of Laredo. And also the violence in the Streets of Laredo at times felt almost too gruesome and gratuitous, and there are a couple of characters that were introduced that are newer characters. I just felt, and Sandy and I were chatting about it, that I didn't even know what they were doing in there other than for horrible things to happen to them. So yeah, those were the downsides, but other than that, it was well paced. We wanted to know what happened, and I enjoyed revisiting the characters. And so we are going to read book 3. Hopefully we'll enjoy book 3 as much. We didn't not enjoy Streets of Laredo, but yeah, if you're wondering if it's as good as Lonesome Dove, it's not. But there, that was that. Then I read a short story, The Black Pages, which is part of the Amazon Black Stars originals, which are exclusive short stories written for Amazon by some prominent Black Afrofuturism authors. One of them is Nnedi Okorafor, and I want to read the series that she's written. It's a trilogy it starts with the first book, Binti, and because of that, I thought, I'll dip into Black Pages because I wanted to sample her writing style, and I really enjoyed it. It's a very short story about a character who goes home from America, has been studying in America, and goes home in Timbuktu in Mali, and the Al Qaeda have invaded the town, Al Qaeda are leaving the town. They had been holding the town and they are leaving, and they decided to burn all the books. And so the story is based around that premise. And it was a good story. I felt it was really interesting, and I liked the writing a lot. So I'm looking forward to reading Binti. Then I did a reread of Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm probably going to do a video on Atomic Habits just because I love it so much, and it's my 3rd reread of that book. But this is a productivity book that millions of people have read, and it's as good as that. There's a reason. If you want to know about habit formation and you want to read a book that will set you up for sort of good systems in your life, then I can't recommend Atomic Habits highly enough. And you'll see tons and tons of videos on it on YouTube. It's a very popular book. But yeah, it was a good way for me to reset and rethink about my habits and what I do and start the year off. So yeah, I reread that, and that was a great reread for me. Then, as part of the Into the Library read-along, which follows on from the Out of the Coffin read-along last year, Ange from Ange's Book Chatter and Amy from BookTube with Amy are running the Into the Library readathon. We're reading another Charlaine Harris series. This time it's the Aurora Teagarden Cozy Mystery series, and Aurora is a librarian, hence Into the Library, and this is the first book, and I really enjoyed it. It's lovely to be back with Charlaine Harris's writing. I find her books a lot of fun. Aurora Teagarden I only read about the first few years ago, and I couldn't really remember the stories, but yeah, Real Murders centres around Aurora, and she lives in a small town, and she's the librarian, and she goes to a club called Real Murders where they're true crime aficionados, so they talk about murders and stuff like that, and some murders start to happen based on real serial murders, which was real good, really good book, really good fun. But the start of it, you can tell it's Charlaine Harris's first book because she's not quite as polished a writer, and I think in the beginning there's a lot of telling us about a lot of different characters and a lot of info dumping, I felt like, at the start. But the last half of the book was loads of fun. I really enjoyed it. Then a reservation on BorrowBox came up for me, which was The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary, which Beth O'Leary is a really popular contemporary romance writer. I do read the odd contemporary romance, and I do, when it's done well, I enjoy it. I really enjoyed this as well. There were a couple of eye roll moments for me because I'm quite cynical when it comes to romance, which is why I don't read a huge amount of it, but I really enjoyed the characters. The Flat Share is about two, a guy and a girl who end up sharing a flat and a bed because one works nights, one works days, and they just leave each other lots of notes. There's a lot more to it than that. What was really interesting was an exploration of controlling coercive relationships, so that made it a little bit more depth to it than most contemporary romances, I feel, and I really enjoyed the characters. I thought they were lovely. But yeah, there were a couple of moments in it for me which were a bit like, oh really, and then one which the trope of someone not talking to someone because they've misunderstood something, which I cannot stand. I find that really, like, it's one thing that really annoys me. You just want to shake these characters and go, well, just ask them, just have a conversation. I find that a really lazy trope, so I don't like it. But despite that, I still enjoyed it. And now I'm listening to The Switch by Beth O'Leary, and I read The Flat Share because I want to watch the new TV show that's on, so I wanted to read the book first. Then I finally read Shuggie Bain. Editing Jack here. So I wanted to refilm what I said about Shuggie Bain because I don't think I did it justice, so I'm just going to talk a bit about it here. So Shuggie Bain is the Booker Prize winner from 2020 and BookTube darling. Most people have heard of Shuggie Bain and read it. Ange from Ange's Book Chatter loves the book and rereads it every year, so I read it as part of her Shug-along, which she did in January with Sam from Paper Knot Books and a few other people on Voxer, which was really lovely. Everyone else had read it before. It's my first time reading it. I absolutely loved it. It's a really, really grim reading, but there's so many uplifting parts and humorous parts, and I absolutely fell in love with the characters in the book. I loved Shuggie, I loved his siblings, particularly Leek, and I loved his mother, Agnes Bain. This story is much Agnes's story as it is Shuggie's story. So if you're not familiar with the story, it's about young Hugh Bain, who's known as Shuggie, who's growing up in the 80s in Glasgow, and he's a young boy in the 80s, and then we flash forward to him being a teenager in the 90s. We're seeing not just his story, but the story of his mother, and then we sort of see an intergenerational story of his grandparents and a few other members of his family. And we see the hardships that are being endured by the people of Glasgow at that time because they're living on a council estate near a coal mine which has been shut down, and there are loads of unemployed, out of work miners on this council estate, and the miners have got no jobs because of the coal mine being shut. The shipbuilding industry has been closed down in Glasgow, so it was a really, really tough time economically and socially in that part of the country. Agnes is a single mother and she's trying to raise Shuggie. He's got two older siblings she had from a previous relationship, and they're much older than Shuggie, so there's quite a gap between them and Shuggie in age. And the difficulties that Shuggie has, not just because his mother is an alcoholic, and not just because she's a single parent with very little money and lots of it she chooses to spend on alcohol. He has other issues because Shuggie doesn't quite feel like the other boys, and the other children seem to think there is something different about Shuggie as well. So there's a real sense of not fitting in and not belonging. There's a lot of homophobia in the book. Your heart goes out to this child in this book so much. It was a really hard-hitting book, and normally I will be quite depressed after reading a book like that, but I felt quite uplifted by the end. I suppose I can't really tell you why without spoiling the end of the book, but I felt there was a lot of hope within this book, and there were a lot of humorous moments, and there was quite a few moments of special love and relationships, particularly between Agnes and Shuggie. And Agnes herself there were glimmers of hope for her as a character, which I felt were fantastically done. It was just an absolutely brilliant read, and one that will stay with me for a long time. If I had to level one criticism at the book, and it's only a slight criticism, I would say that the portrayal of the people on the estate where Shuggie grows up is extremely negative, and there have to be families, and there will have been families who, for the majority, for the most part, kept their houses clean, weren't alcoholics, and managed to find work somewhere. And even if they hadn't found work somewhere, they still kept their houses clean. They still had pride in themselves, and I just don't think that was got across enough in the book to balance it out. But the majority of the people in the estate where he grows up are portrayed as Irish immigrants, and they're living on this council estate. And I grew up in the 80s as a child of Irish immigrants on an estate full of Irish families, and there was a lot of unemployment back in the 80s, and I can tell you now that some families were very dysfunctional and like Shuggie's, and their children were out and left roaming around, and some families, lots of families, weren't like that. You know, they took pride in their homes, they worked, and if they didn't have a job, they were at least clean and they weren't alcoholics. So I feel like the balance between what must have been a balance of people just wasn't portrayed enough in Shuggie Bain for me. So it's the only criticism I could probably level at the book. And if you're a teacher or you're someone who works with young children, I do think it's worth reading, because actually this exploration of how a child who's living with a parent who is an alcoholic or has substance abuse issues or has mental health issues, how they can become a carer for their parent, or at least perceive themselves to be responsible for that parent. And I think it's a really vital book in that sense. So if you do work with children or young people, I think it's a must read. So what am I currently reading? Well, I'm doing the Immune read along for Tandem Collective. I started reading this yesterday and it's brilliant. I am someone who has GCSE level science. That's my level of scientific knowledge. I teach science to primary school children, but so I teach, science for children up to the ages of 10, 11. So other than that, that's my basic science knowledge that I have. And Immune is a really gorgeous book. It's illustrated and it's all about the immune system, and I've been learning a lot, so I've been tabbing quite a lot of what I've been learning, so I'm really enjoying that read along. That's happening at the moment. I'm also currently reading for Past and Future Readathon. My book to start the year off is set the tone for the year, is The House on the Cerulean Sea. I'm probably the last person on BookTube to read this as well, but my friend Sally over on Instagram, she bought me this for my birthday, and we've been trying to find a time to buddy read it, and we just thought let's read it now. It's the perfect time to read it. January, you need a little cozy comfort reading, and it's great. There are some gorgeous messages in it. Only a sort of third or quarter of the way into the book. We're reading a chapter a day and we're taking it nice and slowly, so I'm really enjoying this. Like I said, I'm listening to The Switch by Beth O'Leary. That's really good. And also Alison Steadman is one of the narrators, and she's fantastic. And that's for the Past and Future Readathon. That's my older protagonist that I'm reading at the moment. And I've also just started listening to Davina McCall's Menopausing, which is fascinating. Menopause is a topic that is just not talked about enough. And Davina's mission is to get the message out there to talk about menopause. It happens to 50% of us, and it's almost like a shameful, embarrassing secret. So yeah, it's a fascinating book, and I will talk about it more when I've finished it. Today as well, I just finished Mayflies. So talking about things that I want to take part in, one thing I'm taking part in this year is a new book club, Fiction Addiction, run by Amy and Ange. They run such great events. Like, if you're not familiar with Amy or Ange, please go and subscribe to them both. They're delightful. They read fascinating books, and they they've only chose a couple of books every 2 months. They've only chosen 2 books so far. They're going to set them as the year goes on. But the first book I just finished was Mayflies by Andrew Hagen. Mayflies is also now a TV series, which I'm now going to watch, but it is the story of a friendship between Tully and Jimmy, who grow up in Glasgow they're teenagers in the 80s, and we have the first part of the book is set on a weekend where they go to Manchester and they go to see the Smiths in the 80s, and then we flash forward to the present day and we catch up with them. And what I would say is, it's a short book, it's beautifully written book and a beautiful portrayal of friendship. And it's also it's called Mayflies because it's about these sort of ephemeral nature of life and friendships, and how life passes you by so quickly. Like, you blink and it's like you 1 minute you're 18 and the next minute you blink and you're 40, and it's about how these moments pass by so quickly. it's a really poignant book. So their next book is called The Anomaly, and it's about a plane that lands and then hours later the same plane lands with the same people on it, and I really can't wait to read it. So I've got that out of the library and I'm going to be reading that too. So I'm going to stop there because that's a lot. That's a lot for the moment. If you are new to my channel and you want to subscribe for more rambling nonsense, not quite sure why you'd want to, but if you like it and you'd like to subscribe, please do. Please leave a comment. If you are someone who sticks around and likes to comment, please leave one. If you've never commented before and you're not quite sure and you're a bit shy about commenting, maybe drop me a cup of coffee or tea or whatever in the description box to let me know you're here and you've enjoyed it. And hopefully I'll see you again soon. Bye.